So, welcome everybody to this meeting at 3 PSE. And tonight's speaker is Chana Studley. Most welcome. And we're going to do this in English. And the questions too, please. So, Chana, do you want to talk first and then the questions afterwards? Is that a good way for you?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So I have some a short bio. Is it okay if I read that?
Please, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So, and do I pronounce your name right? Is it without the C? Or...
Yes.
Yeah,
it's
so
like
so
Hannah, but you got it. Great, thank you.
Okay. So Chana Studley has been coaching and counseling people for over 30 years, surviving 3 violent muggings and recovering from severe PTSD. In the 1980s, Chana went on to have a very successful Academy Award-winning career in Hollywood. After graduating from the One Thought Institute in 2018, she has been leading the way in pioneering work with the 3 principles and the Mindbody Connection. Most recently, she has been working with people with long COVID and hormones distress. Chana is a World Health Organization psychological first responder, has a diploma in psychology, and is certified life coach. She is a successful entrepreneur and author. Chana's first book, The Myth of Low Self-Esteem, a novel about PTSD, Hollywood, and healing, came out in 2019. And her second, Painless, a novel about chronic pain and the mind-body connection, was published in 2021. Her latest book, Very Well, a novel about hormones, women, and why Freud was wrong, was released in February this year and became an Amazon bestseller. Wow, welcome, Chana.
Thank you, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Great. And I just have to say that I finished, as I wrote to you, I finished your book last week. And it was, I'm going to show everyone here.
Yay!
Yay, here it is. And it's quite thick, but it was
Yeah.
an easy read. And I just loved it. And I'm not saying that because you're here, because I have been saying it to my neighbor too. And I think of course, men too, but every woman should read this because it's about hormones, and everyone interested in Freud and not interested in his theory, maybe just read it. It's lovely. So thank you for the book, Chana.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So just feel free to start to talk to us what your wisdom is telling you today.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, it's funny. Dr. Bill Pettit, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. He's been my teacher and my mentor for many years now. And he told me off for calling it why Freud was wrong. I got a slap from him because he said Freud was actually the first person to realize that we experience our thinking. Like before that, people never occurred to them. So Freud did do a lot. He saw a lot. He did see something different, something new. He just didn't understand it or know what to do with it. And I guess that's what I'm pointing to in the book, is that he then goes into, what we would call outside in, solutions to try and fix and change thinking and believing that we were broken and there's something wrong with us. So, but Bill started reading it, and like you said, he said not only should every woman read it, but he said every man should read it too, because men have hormones as well, and men know women with hormones, so it's probably a good idea for men to read it as well. And yeah, I was surprised. I didn't realize how thick it was going to be when I wrote it, but I enjoy writing now. It's a new thing for me. I'll just go back and tell you a little bit of my story, I guess. So So I grew up in England, and I'm in Israel right now. I live in Jerusalem, and in England, it's so funny being a writer now, because I failed miserably in school. I didn't graduate, really. I didn't. I managed to scrape into university, but with the bare minimum of qualifications. My English language exams were like, I failed 4 times, and so it's kind of funny now to be writing. But I did a textiles degree at Manchester University, and whilst I was in Manchester, I was mugged 3 times, as some of you know, and experienced, some terrible violence, some very traumatic experiences. And my skull was fractured, my neck was broken, my back was, I had 3 herniated discs from one of the attacks. And so I moved down to London, which is where I was attacked again. And so 3 times of experiencing, violence and feeling very vulnerable. I got very, very ill in terms of my thinking. This was in the early 1980s, so PTSD it was only just being recognized in America. So, with Vietnam War veterans is really how it came about. So, in Manchester and London, all I got was a cup of tea and, suck it up and walk, go home and walk it off. That was kind of the treatment I got. So I really struggled. And it's funny, I was telling someone earlier today how the violence that I experienced probably only lasted a matter of minutes, really not that long. It's over in a few minutes. But the suffering went on for years. The suffering, a good 10 years of what you probably would call PTSD, where you're reliving the event. And I innocently, we stress innocently, I didn't know any different. I just would have this story like turning round and round in my head. At first it was, when you left the house last time, they almost killed you. 2 weeks ago, you left the house and they almost killed you. 3 months ago, you almost died when you left the house. And it got so bad that by the time I was living in London, I was so frightened to leave the house because I had evidence. I had police reports and x-rays to show that the world is a very scary place. And so I was so caught up in that thinking that I knew that if a bus went out of control in central London, I'd be the person it ran over, right? I knew that if someone was accidentally pushed in front of a train, it would be me. That's kind of where my thinking was at. It was very, very delusional, very disordered, and consequently, I was making myself sick. I had chronic pain for 25 years as a result of all this stress. And one of the interesting things to me is, I've been around the 3 principles for about 7 or 8 years now, I guess. And last year, I was only just beginning to realize just how anxious I was. I never saw it as anxiety. I knew I was judgmental, but I had good reason to be judgmental, partly because of, the terrible things that happened to me, but also because I was usually right. Before I came across the 3 principles, I was into something called the Enneagram. I don't know if any of you guys know what the Enneagram is. I see Hannah's nodding her head. So I'm actually, my life coaching certificate is as an Enneagram life coach. I have a diploma in Enneagram diagnostics. So for those of you who don't know what it means, it's a personality system. It's a way of understanding different personalities. And these personalities, there's 9 in this particular system. I'm not advocating or promoting it at all. I'm just explaining something, but those personality types all have a nickname. There's the tragic romantic, and there's the analyst, and the peacemaker. They're like kind of stereotypes of personalities. And the one that describes me, what I used to think my personality type was, is called a perfectionist. And when I first read that when I was training, I was like, no, I'm not a perfectionist. That's not me. And then I was watching a video. It was a training video where someone was interviewing 3 people of my particular type. And he asked them, how did you feel when someone called you a perfectionist? And like me, they all went, no, I'm not a perfectionist. Like, I mean, if you could see, like, it's nice and neat here, but there's, you know, dishes in my sink, my kitchen that need to, you know, there's cat toys on the floor. You can see my cat here, right? Like outside of the frame, it's, you know, a little messy over there. So I'm not a perfectionist. But on this video, one of the 3 people who were being interviewed said, see those flowers on the table, if they were just this way around, they would look so much better. And the other 2 people went, yes, that's been bothering me. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I do. Because I started understanding perfectionist thinking, it's not really like OCD where everything has to be lined up and all be in order. It's more like we see when things are wrong. We see when things aren't the right way, or someone's breaking the rules, or they've done it, you know, it should have been done this way. It would be better if you do it this way. Something I realized recently, I was walking through a parking lot, you know, a car park, English American, right? And you know how, like, it was actually IKEA. So I was in IKEA. We have IKEA. We have 2 of them in Israel, right? And I was at IKEA, and you know how they paint the white lines on the tarmac so you know where to park your car, right? And you know how there's always that idiot who parks too close to the white line, right? And then you can't get your car in, or if you do, you have to ding your car or climb out the other side. And I saw this person had parked way too, like, or over a white line. And I'm thinking, that is so selfish. Like, it's just not right. Like, can they just take another minute to park their car properly? And then I stopped and I caught myself and I thought, oh my gosh, it's got nothing to do with me. I don't even have a car right now because there's nowhere to park where I live, right? And I started laughing. And then I started realizing that my thinking was like that all the time. And one of the symptoms of PTSD is hypervigilance. That's quite a common understanding, that people who've been through a trauma often get very vigilant about the sounds or the smells, or, you know, certain places that are associated with, you know, what happened to them. And for me, it certainly was the sound of footsteps, because when I was mugged the second time, 3 men came out of the dark and slammed me on the ground and beat the living daylights out of me. So for many years afterwards, the sound of footsteps behind me, you know, even on a sunny, beautiful day, I could be in California, you know, where I ended up living and working, and someone could be running past me for a bus or jogging, you know, exercising, and I'd be like, you know, my nervous system would jump. And so I think what happened is this hypervigilant reaction that came as a result of the traumas. When I got well from the PTSD, that hypervigilance almost went inside. It became internal, because as I got really involved in self-help, you know, doing all these different therapies and different modalities and learning lots of different techniques. I was a trauma counselor for many years. I think that hypervigilance, you know, being super careful about everything, it started to become internal. And I think that's what the judgmentalness was about, was checking everything to make sure it was the right way that I needed it to be, so that nothing was ever out of place or nothing was ever out of control, because then I would feel safe. And it was an innocent misunderstanding I had. I thought, if I can just control you and them and it, then I'll feel okay. And then as I got more and more into self-help and understanding personalities and thinking, that hypervigilance kind of turned inward, and I started doing it with my thinking. And I got very, very good at being vigilant about my thinking. I had a whole, you know, bag of tools and techniques to control my thinking, you know, like expressive writing and meditation and all these kind of things. Because by the time I found the 3 principles, I knew the problem was in my thinking. I just thought I had to do something about it, like, and it, you know, color it, do something with it. And I think that was one of my first big insights when I found the principles, this realization, this insight that I don't have to do anything with my thinking, because it's always moving. You know, it's a spiritual energy. It's constantly moving through our minds. It never stays still. It can't even get stuck, although it feels like it does sometimes. And so because if it's constantly moving, there's nothing to do, because every stinky thought I've ever had, every broken heart, every judgment, every, everything, every uncomfortable thought has moved on. So I started to see that all those techniques I was using and I was sharing with all my clients all those years was actually kind of like if you imagine thought is like a train going through the station, it's kind of like dragging that train back into the station to work out how to make it leave, right? Well, it already left, right? So all the busy, hard work I was doing to try and meditate it away or write it away was actually messing with the system and was actually causing more stress, I see now. And then after I did the One Thought program in London with Aaron Turner, back then it was, you did it live. So I would travel from Israel to London. I had to go 3 or 4 times, for different sessions. And in between we had online classes with George Prensky and Linda and Elsie Spittle. It was quite an amazing course. And when I noticed afterwards that all my physical pain had gone away, it started to make perfect sense to me, because as my thinking slowed down and I got to feel much safer in my environment and in my thoughts and in my life, my body didn't need to produce pain anymore. The pain that I'd been experiencing all that time, like terrible back pain, I had sciatica, I was actually paralyzed a few times. I also had IBS, which is like stomach problems. I'd wake up sometimes and my arm was numb, because, they said that's where the nerve for my arm comes out of my neck, where my neck was broken. I had asthma, I had allergies, eczema, skin problems, all kinds of things. And it all kind of melted away. And I think it's because as my thinking slowed down and I stopped all that busy work to fix something that wasn't broken, right? My brain didn't need to send me those pain messages anymore to get my attention, so it kind of just melted away. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I've been pain-free for about, say, 6 or 7 years now, which is actually incredible. After 25 years of going to the chiropractor, having endless physical issues to deal with. I had allergies for 50 years. I'm turning 59 next month. So I've been sneezing my head off since I was like 5 years old. My eyes burning. And where I live now, I live in the Middle East, and I'm actually allergic to olive blossom, like when trees are, I can eat olives, but the blossom, when the trees are, growing the fruit, that happens between like, now actually kind of between March and May. And normally at this time of year, my eyes would be streaming and burning right now. I probably wouldn't be able to do this call because I wouldn't be able to breathe, sinus infections, coughing, sneezing, flaky skin. I mean, horrendous. I'd want to rip my face off and stick it in a bucket of cold water. It was so bad. And look, I don't have allergies anymore. After 50 years of having injections and a surgery on my nose and constant medications and salt water up and, like all the things I tried. And things would work sometimes. Homeopathy worked for a little while, but it would always come back. The pain would always come back. And I see now it was because I was living in this world of anxious thinking. And like I said, I never thought I was an anxious person. Partly because I was right, because I'm a perfectionist and I do know the right way to do things, right? Like parking your car in between the white lines, And but all that anxiety I now see was actually sending danger messages to my brain and making me feel unsafe. And I find a lot of people spend their lives feeling unsafe. And then, for me, it was physical issues. For other people, it can show up as, I don't know, divorces or bankruptcies, or there's lots of ways our stinky thinking can manifest in our lives. So I am so grateful to this understanding, because it took me further from, like I said, I understood that the problem was in my thinking, and then understanding the nature of thought, I stopped having to do all those things to fix and change it. And so, and I was actually going through menopause at the time when I came across the principles. And that was actually my very first question. I had a session with Dr. Mark Howard, and if you guys know Mark, but he's a really, really kind gentleman. And I remember my very first question to him was, I get it's thinking, but what about hormones? Like, get out of that one, right? And I remember he went, he thought for a moment, he said, no, it's still your thinking. And I'm like, really? Because then he started asking me some questions. He said, how would you know that your temperature just changed? How would you know that your brain is foggy? How would you know you've just had a hot flush, right? How would you know that your mood has dropped? By your thinking. Like, our moods are, I've now realized our moods are actually very useful. They let me know the quality of my thinking. I used to be terrified of my moods. I thought, once I got in a mood, that was it. Forget it. Don't talk to me. Right? It could last for days, weeks, maybe a decade. Right? And now I see that I can even feel a mood coming, and it's kind of like a little, tap on the shoulder. Careful, where are you going with that? And I know now that I can take my grounding with me into that low mood, and I don't have to judge it, because we're all human beings. We can all have some funky thoughts or inappropriate thoughts or sad thoughts or, whatever kind of thoughts. But I've learned now, if I don't judge it, it doesn't turn into anything anymore. And I can even go through, something difficult with a quiet mind. You can bear it. And if I don't feed it or fight it, it moves on. We get to be a human being. We're not in denial here. And I don't have to be frightened of it anymore. Like Sid Banks promised. A couple of times this year, I've been called a 3 principles purist. And I'm not sure it was meant as a compliment, but I'm going to take it as a compliment. I've decided to take it as a compliment. I've dropped all those techniques, all those things. I don't even go to the chiropractor anymore. I would if my wisdom told me to, but I just don't need to anymore. I have found the principles understanding to be not just sufficient, but like just a beautiful, growing, developing journey. And I haven't needed to go back to the Enneagram or go back to any meditation or any of those things. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with them. I just don't need them anymore. The more the more I get grounded in these ideas, the less I need to look elsewhere for solutions. So I guess that's what I wanted to say for now. I love questions. So if, please feel free to ask questions, because I love answering questions.
Thank you, Chana. And we're open up for questions. You can either raise your hand, your virtual hand, down on the bottom. And you can also maybe write in, if you don't want to say it out loud, you can write it in the chat and Ivan can read it out. So just welcome.
Mm-hmm.
One question coming in here in the chat what was the biggest insight that made the biggest shift for you?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. There have been a few. I think my very first insight was very powerful for me. In fact, you guys may be familiar with Charles Rosenblatt. He's one of the organizers of the London conference. Charles and Aaron do it together. Well, Charles' eldest daughter, Shifra, used to live here in Jerusalem. So she was kind of like my first 3 principles teacher. I kind of snuck into her classes, and I'm literally old enough to be her mother, but because I think she'd grown up with the 3 principles, having Charles as a father, and she's a natural teacher. She was just a fantastic teacher. And we ended up doing a lot of events together because I caught on pretty quickly and we kind of became a team. But I remember that very first class I was in with Shifra, and it was a women's group. And she was doing this wonderful job of, sharing the principles. And there was a woman there who said, she told us some story about a difficulty in her relationship. Something was going, very painful at home. And because I was very new to this and I was older than most of the people in the room, I felt, and I've been coaching people for many years, I felt justified in giving my opinion. So I said something like, well, what I've learned to do is, ignore those kind of thoughts. And then Shifra, in a very sweet English way, said, well, that worked for Hannah, or you could just do nothing. And I was like, but that's what I said. Ignore them. Right? And why is she criticizing me in front of other people? And I got all up in my head, started overthinking it. And I probably didn't hear anything for the rest of that session. And then it was really funny. About 6 weeks later is when I started the One Thought program. And I was actually staying with Charles and Hannah in London, Shifra's parents. And in London, in a Jewish home in London on a Sunday morning, everybody's asleep, right? They're not going anywhere. But I had to get up really early to get across central London to start this course. And so I'm creeping around their house. Now, I don't know if you guys know anything about a kosher kitchen, but we have 2 sets of plates for everything. And if it's your own kitchen, they don't label things, but I didn't know which. So basically I'm creeping around this kitchen. I don't know what plate to use and what bowl and what spoon and where's the cereal. And I don't want to wake anybody up because I'm a guest. So my point is, I wasn't sitting there meditating and reflecting on spiritual issues. I was trying not to make a noise and I was trying not to mess up their kitchen. And I sat down finally with a bowl and some cereal. And I suddenly went, oh, ignoring your thoughts is doing something. And it was like, boom, it was like, and I hadn't even been thinking about it. And this is like 6 weeks later that this idea just went boom in my head. And in that moment, I think I saw the futility of all that work I'd been doing to try and fix my thinking. That's when I started to see that it wasn't necessary. And not only not necessary, but could actually be messing with the system. One of the analogies, that we often use is that thought is like traffic, cars and buses and trucks and bicycles going by on a street. Now, if you're trying to catch a bus and you go into a busy street and you try and stop the traffic because you want your bus, then you're probably going to cause a traffic jam. You might even cause an accident. You're probably going to be unpopular. You're messing with the system, right? It's so much better to stand on the pavement or the sidewalk and wait at the bus stop and your bus will come along. And in a split second, I saw that, like how messing with the system is just not needed. Thoughts are going to flow. Thoughts always flow. Thoughts are always moving. So when we say there's nothing to do, that's what we mean. There's nothing to do with the thinking because it's always moving. There's plenty to do in life. I have a very busy life. I do plenty, but I don't have to do anything with my thinking because there's nothing to fix because there's nothing broken and it's going to move anyway. It has its self-correcting system of movement. Like if you stand in a river or the sea and you mess up all the sand, if you stay still, the water will go clear again. That's how our minds are. And I'm just thinking of a few other little insights. Well, many I got along the way, and one of them just came into my head was when I was writing the Painless book. I had this massive insight. in the pain management world, they often talk about the wisdom of the body, how our bodies are made with such incredible wisdom. Like if you cut your finger, then, you know, the blood coagulates and fixes, you know. If you, you know, if you break a bone, then, you know, like the calcium comes back to fix the bone. You know, there's infections. There's all kinds of ways our bodies have incredible wisdom to fix themselves. So I suddenly had this thought, if the divine mind, which is what Sid Banks called it, or God, or, you know, the creative intelligence of the universe, whatever you want to call it, created my body with incredible wisdom to fix itself, wouldn't it have given me a way for my mind to fix itself? I mean, if it's the creator of everything, it created my mind, my brain, and my body, right? So if my body can like heal a cut, then surely my mind can fix a thought storm. And it can, right? I was like, that's such amazing. Like there's such wisdom in the system. There's such loving kindness in the system that we're blessed with this mind that if we just leave it alone, it will settle, it will heal, it will move on. And every time it moves on, it always leaves room for fresh, new, beautiful, creative thought that usually gets me laughing when I realize how ridiculous the thought is that I got caught up in earlier. And it always gets replaced by some laughter and smiles. And like, then you come back to the moment, you're like, oh yeah, just got caught up, just been a bit human. That's all that happened. So those are a couple of my insights. I'm sure there's more. Thank you. I can keep talking. There's lots of things. Just give me a topic. Give me something to talk about. I'd be happy to share more about the principles or physical stuff.
I have a topic, Chana.
Yeah.
I heard you talking on the 3P UK conference once about consciousness and the special effects, right? And you were curious. So if you want to say something about that, I would love that. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, that was the talk I gave at the London conference was I had a video to go with it, but I can probably describe, you know, what I was saying. What happened was when I started working with people with physical issues, and I would explain how we're always feeling our thinking, people would often say to me, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I wasn't thinking anything. I just woke up with a headache, or I woke up with a back pain. I wasn't thinking anything. So at first I would say to them, you probably were, you just didn't realize it. You know, often when we get into a low mood and we spend a lot of time in a low mood, we don't really notice it anymore because it's kind of become normal. You know, it's kind of like the wallpaper, like, you know, if it's something is there all the time, then you don't really notice it. And so I kind of felt like I was trying to persuade them that they were experiencing their thinking. And then I realized that I wanted to give a better explanation of how thought shows up. So I started to think about all the different ways that thought and consciousness kind of work together to produce our experience. And I like I said, when I found the principles, I was I kind of knew that we're experiencing our thinking. And then I started seeing that thought can show up in many different ways. It can show up in like thinky thoughts, like, you know, I was doing because when I did special effects in movies, I made puppets, so I started moving my hands around. Like, so thoughts can say things like, you know, do the laundry. No, I don't want to. You know, walk the dog. I'll do it later. Right? I don't know about you guys, but often I can have a whole committee talking in my head sometimes. And so these thoughts can show up as thinky thoughts. But the gift of thought, the principle of thought, can also show up as images, for example. Now, when I worked in Hollywood, I did, say, special effects. I was known for making copies of real animals. I don't know if you saw the movie Babe, like 30 years ago now, but, you know, it had talking animals in it. So I made the dogs. I made some wings for John Travolta in a movie called Michael. I made a tiger and a dog for Dr. Dolittle with Eddie Murphy. So I got known for making animals, really. And so my whole career in Hollywood was trying to convince you that something was real that wasn't, right? Now, the whole of Hollywood is about illusions, but specifically special effects. Because when I tell people I made the puppets in Babe, they say, there's no puppets in Babe. I go, does your dog talk? Right? Right? And they're like, yeah, but it's all computers. And I'm like, no, not in the early 90s, it wasn't. We were still making actual puppets that had fur and feathers, and we operated them, and, you know, they were actual things you could touch. So the special effects that me and Steven Spielberg and, you know, all the people working in Hollywood came up with, I now see as nowhere near the special effects that our thoughts and our consciousness can produce. Because let's say thought shows up as images sometimes. Because when I was making those special effects, an art director or producer would come to me and say, can you make this, I don't know, weird and wonderful creature or something? And I'd go, yeah, okay, I can do that for you. There were no words involved. I was picturing, you know, in my mind, what I needed to make something, to create something. And then I would go and make it. And I didn't ever draw a picture, hardly ever. And that's not just because I worked in Hollywood. Everybody can do that. If you all, I don't know if you want to do this right now, because I hate this when other people do, like, let's all close our eyes, but try it. Right? If you close your eyes for a few minutes and picture a beach, right? Picture a beach. Imagine there's, you know, you can see the ocean, you can see the sand. You know, if it's Hawaii, then you've got a nice cocktail with a little umbrella in it. If it's, you know, the north of England, then it's probably raining and there's a cup of tea, right? Now, you're doing all of that with the gift of thought. And depending on your consciousness, you're going to be picturing something beautiful and, you know, maybe tropical, or maybe if you're in a low mood, you might be picturing the rain. Now, I like the rain. I like British beaches. I find the kind of like bleakness, you know, sometimes is kind of, you know, very romantic. So it's all subjective. It's all happening with the gift of thought and consciousness. And then I started to see that the gift of thought actually can show up as sounds. Like when I was doing the talk at the conference, I made a little soundtrack, and I found the music from Jaws. Do you guys remember the movie Jaws with the shark? So that movie came out in 1975. Now I was around, but I was too young to go to the movie theater to see it. But I can remember what a huge fuss was made in the media about it. Everybody was terrified to go into the water that summer. So the music, I think it was John Williams composed the music. It's a very famous piece of music. You know, dun 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 dun. Like the shark is coming through the water at you. So I played this here on a conference in London. We're, you know, several hundred miles from the ocean, and everybody went, right? It's like 30 or 40 years later, maybe, yeah, 40 years later, and people are still going, you know, when they hear that music. All of that special effect is happening via the gift of thought in our consciousness. And that is just, it's generated from the inside out. The music, because there were a couple of younger people in the audience who hadn't heard it. They didn't know what Jaws was. And so they're like, they didn't have the same reaction as the, you know, people of my age in the audience did, because we all immediately pictured the, you know, the shark going through the water, right? And the woman being eaten alive. So thought can show up as thinky thoughts. It can show up as images. It can show up as sounds. it can also show up as pain and sensations. So remember, I'm not talking about words right now. I'm talking about this spiritual energy that morphs and takes different forms, and it can show up as sensations. So everything from pain to hunger to dizziness to, you know, all kinds of physical things, numbness even, are just another way that thought is showing up, because how else would we be experiencing it? And depending on my level of consciousness, those sensations are going to be interpreted as bad or good or not at all or indifferent. It's funny, have you ever had I used to get a bruise on my leg, you know, a bruise is like the green and purple mark on your skin. And I have no idea how it happened, right? Now, a bruise is tissue damage. And yet I don't remember it happening. I don't remember bumping into anything. How did that happen? And yet other times we can, you know, like say, get, the other day I just started reading Mavis Karn's new book, right? And I was holding it in my hands, brand new, and I cut it cut my hand here, like just a simple paper cut. And it stung like crazy for ages, right? So it's, you know, pain is a fascinating thing. It is the ultimate special effect. Because as I started to understand how pain works, I started to realize it doesn't actually happen in the body, it happens in the brain. For example, when I cut my hand on the book, the nerves here sent a message down my arm up to my brain saying, oh, injury. And my brain makes an assessment whether or not to produce pain. So there's lots of examples of this. Like, for example, I think what I used in the talk in London was Forrest Gump, because first of all, I haven't met anybody who's not seen Forrest Gump, right, the movie. And if you remember, there's a scene in the movie where he's in Vietnam, and he and his buddies are injured, and he's carrying them out of the jungle to safety, and then they get a helicopter back to the base. And Forrest actually has a bullet in his buttocks, you know, in his bottom, and yet he's able to pick up a man and repeatedly carry a man on his shoulders, even though he's got a bullet in his backside. Now, that's obviously a movie, but there are so many examples of soldiers being in combat and receiving some terrible injury, and they don't actually feel it until they get to safety. Or I've heard stories of, like, say, a mother being in a car accident and she's desperately trying to pull her kids out of the car, and it's not till later she finds that she's got, you know, a bone sticking out of her arm. In fact, Dickon Bettinger told me a story once where he said he and his wife Coisy were driving, and they, I think somebody else's tire blew. They had an accident. It was really bad. The car turned over, and Dickon was so scared of his wife being injured. She was stuck in the car, and he pulled her out, and he got her out of the car, and then an ambulance came and they went to the hospital, and he made sure that the doctors took care of his wife, and that she was, you know, because he was afraid that she was unconscious for a few seconds, so he really wanted to get the doctors to look after his wife. And then after his wife had been settled in a bed and she was being taken care of, the doctor said to him, and what about you? And Dickon's like, what? And then the doctor lifted up his shirt, and Dickon had this big gash, big cut in his middle, and the blood was pouring out onto his shirt, but he hadn't even noticed because he was taking care of his wife. And it's an incredible thing that the brain, based on our five senses, makes an assessment as to whether pain would be useful right now. So when you twist your ankle, you probably feel pain straight away, because the brain is assessing that to keep walking on a twisted ankle could be dangerous, might even be broken. So if we feel pain in our ankle, but it's actually coming from the brain. But like when Dickon was trying to save his wife, he didn't feel any pain, even though he had quite a bad injury that needed stitches, because the brain makes an assessment that pain would not be useful in that situation. And we're experiencing all of this via the gift of thought and consciousness. And divine mind is the wisdom behind this system. And chronic pain, which is what I was experiencing for many years, is actually when the system goes wrong. And because I was caught up in my head in so much anxiety all the time, the brain was actually using pain to get my attention. And I innocently didn't understand the message, which is why it took a long time. My body was screaming at me to stop and slow down until I finally started understanding how that works. So special effects are, I've often been asked, how did I go from doing special effects in movies to working with, coaching people? Well, that's my long answer is, right? Our minds have a better special effects department than anything we could have come up in Hollywood. And, I don't know about you guys, but I have been convinced that things are real many times in my life that really weren't. I'm quite convinced something is true and it wasn't. And then especially with things like danger, because if we think we're in danger, then our nervous system gets revved up and like, oh my gosh, my hands are shaking, it must be true, right? Well, it's only because I've scared myself with my own thinking. And now, understanding that means I don't have to live in that scary, dangerous world. My world is pretty safe, and I live somewhere where we have a lot of terror. There were rockets and, landing last week, we get sirens and I actually feel pretty safe most of the time, because safety really is a state of mind. It's really about consciousness and where we're holding in that trust, trusting that we're going to be taken care of. So thank you for, I love talking about the special effects. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hey, I see a hand.
Yeah, Kenny.
Thank you, Chana. Hannah, for sharing.
Thank you.
I was just more curious about developing it a little bit more when you told me that when you had your chronic pain and you listened to your wisdom to slow down. Can you develop that a little bit more? What was it you slowed down? Was it your life, or was it your thinking, or what was it that slowed down?
Yeah, thank you. It's funny, I can answer that question when it happens to me now. Meaning, like, I can still get, a twinge or a pulled muscle, or, I had pneumonia last November, for example, stuff still happens, right? But it doesn't turn into anything anymore, because I've understood that that's my body talking to me. I was coaching a young boy a couple of weeks ago. He's probably about 12 years old. So I was trying to be creative and think of ways to explain this to him. So I asked him, what happens when it's lunchtime? How does he know to eat something? And he says, well, my tummy gets rumbly. I'm like, yeah. Now, when your tummy rumbles, does that mean you're dying? He goes, no, right? It means you're hungry, right? I was like, okay, good. I said, what happens when you're running around playing football? And it was funny because when we were talking, it was raining outside, and he couldn't think of the word for sweat, to be sweaty. He said, my body starts leaking, which in English is really funny. Right? And we had a good laugh, but he thought, he realized it was funny. I said, so when you're sweating, is your body leaking? And he's like, no, I said, what does it mean? He says, well, it means I should probably, I don't know, take my hoodie off or have a drink of water or something because you're hot. I said, yeah. And then I said to him, what happens when it's time to go to bed? I said, do your eyelids get heavy? You know, have you ever had that? Like you're trying to keep your eyes open because your mom's telling you to go to bed and you don't want to. And he says, yeah. I said, well, does that mean you have to go to the hospital if your eyelids get heavy? It's like, no, it just means you need to go to bed. I'm like, right. So I was trying to show him there are ways that the body sends us messages. It's not good or bad. It's just wisdom. You know, our eyelids get heavy when we're sleepy. We sweat when we get hot. You know, our tummies rumble when we're hungry. There's probably more. Those are just the ones I could think of when I was talking to him. And they're wisdom. They're just the ways we learn. So what I learned about pain was that when I get a twinge, like if my back starts to feel achy, it means I've probably been sitting too long, or maybe I got stressed about something, or maybe I need to exercise or drink some water or whatever it is. I've learned to listen to it now. Like I make lots of little memes, and one of them, my favorites, is if you can't hear your body whisper, you'll have to listen to it scream. So, excuse me. So these days I've learned to interpret the whispers and take care of it so it doesn't turn into something. Before, when I had the chronic pain for years, the back pain specifically was the worst, I guess. I would get this twinge in my back, and then my whole body would shift usually to the left, and then I'd be bent forward, and then I'd get pain shooting down my legs, sciatica pain all the way down to my feet. There were several times when I actually could not move, like from my chest down, no movement in my body for hours. I remember one time like dragging myself to the bathroom with my arms. One time, like when I first arrived here, I was before the principals. I remember I was going to the chiropractor, and I came out of his office and I was literally stuck. I was in so much pain, and I remember I had to cross the road to catch the bus back, and I knew I would not be able to make it across the road. My body wouldn't do it. So I sat down on I know there was a pipe or something sticking out the wall. So I just sat to rest, and I got stuck there. I had to call a friend to come and get me and help me home. I was rushed to the emergency room once from a movie set, paralyzed, couldn't move my legs. Really frightening stuff, because thank God each time it was temporary, but at the time I didn't know that. And so I kind of carried around this story in the back of my head that maybe next time it's going to be permanent. Maybe next time it's not going to come back, the feeling, which is a very like heavy story to carry around. I kind of pictured my spine as being fragile and broken, and at any moment it could just crumble. There were times when my pelvis felt like someone had hit it with a baseball bat. Real terrible pain. And what I've learned is the pain is real as any pain can be. Like I'm not exaggerating it, I'm not making it up. My brain is sending pain, even though there wasn't any injury or anything wrong. My brain was trying to wake me up to slow down. So at the beginning, I didn't know that my pain could go away. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of money and time searching for, I don't know, methods and techniques and chiropractors and treatments to relieve their pain. Because I was always told that my pain was coming from those injuries that I'd had back in my 20s. I just knew my body's getting older and it's going to get worse. It's not going to go away. And then when I did the One Thought program in London, like I said, I had to keep flying backwards and forwards. So that's when I stopped going to the chiropractor, because there was the course was expensive, and flying all the time was expensive. And when you're traveling, you're spending money. And when I was there, I wasn't working here. So I had to save money. And I stopped going to the chiropractor simply for financial reasons, like a budget thing, to save money until the course was over. So the course finished, And I remember sitting here in my chair, and I suddenly realized I didn't have any pain. And not only did I not have any pain, but I felt strong, stronger than I'd felt since I was like a teenager. And I started thinking, when did I last have a big pain flare up? And I realized it was like when I discovered the principles. I have not had a massive pain flare up since the first time I sat down and watched Sydney Banks on YouTube. So again, it wasn't anything I did. What I think happened is, as my thinking slowed down as a result of multiple insights and learning and understanding and having some wonderful teachers, my nervous system got the message I was safe and didn't need to produce that special effect of pain anymore, or the allergies, or the, skin problems or stomach problems. It wasn't needed anymore. And so it went away. Now, when I got pneumonia last November, that was a bacteria thing or virus, or I don't know what, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what it is, but there was something. And then I had antibiotics, and it went away, right? So I actually learned something very interesting recently from Dr. Bill Pettit. I was hearing him talking to another person, and he was saying, he said, antibiotics will be affected by state of mind. And I said, what? And I asked him to repeat that. I said, because I knew that stress can affect your immune system. I know that stress can affect your digestive system or even your heart, your heart rate. But an antibiotic, I think I had an idea that something like an antibiotic is, it's chemicals, it's neutral, you take it, it does its job, right? And he said, no, he said, doctors know that, surgeons know that if you're in a really low mood, a really bad place, an antibiotic is not going to work as well as if you're in a good place. And I thought about it, and I thought, there's people who always get sick. They get the flu every winter, or 3 or 4 flus, and it takes 3 or 4 different antibiotics for them to get better. You're saying, yeah, that's because state of mind can affect how your body reacts to an antibiotic even. And how it reacts to food. I've worked with a lot of people with food allergies and intolerances who've gotten better when their thinking slows down, when they have insights. So again, we're not working on the physical issues. The physical issues seem to take care of themselves when we are in a better state of mind, when we're not overreacting or hyperreacting or oversensitive or hypervigilant like I used to be. The easier going I am, and the more relaxed, or the more, go with the flow kind of thing, my body doesn't need to scream at me anymore. So it's been a fascinating journey. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I was thinking about that with that the body is unstiffening or something like that, so the flow can go through. So you're in a low state of mind, you're blocking the energy in some way.
Yeah, it's one of the doctors, I read a lot of his books, Dr. Sarno. I don't know if people are familiar with that name, but Sarno was one of the first medical doctors to kind of pioneer the mind-body medicine, research. And his explanation was that when we're in fight or flight, then the nervous system, thinks we're in danger, and so it gets ready to fight or run away. And so it moves all the oxygen and the blood flow to our large muscles, like in your legs and your arms, to run or to fight. And what happens is, if we are in an actual crisis, that's a good thing. When we are in an emergency situation, it's good that your blood and your oxygen is going to your muscles to survive. It means we can run away, or like lift a car off your husband, or whatever we need to do to survive. That again is wisdom. But the problem comes that if we are in fight or flight all the time, like our anxiety level is really high, like our stress levels are very high, then adrenaline and cortisol are being pumped into the body all the time, and our bodies weren't built to sustain that level of adrenaline and cortisol. And also, the blood isn't flowing properly because it's going to our large muscles to run away from that tiger or that, you know, burning house. And yet we're just sitting on the sofa. So I think that's why my back was always hurting, because the oxygen, and Dr. Sarno said that it could be as little as 5% depletion of oxygen is enough to cause excruciating pain. So if I'm sitting on the sofa worrying, anxious, or depressed even, then my blood isn't flowing properly. And that's where the pain was coming from. And the other interesting thing about that is that what I discovered about fight or flight is not only is it about oxygen and blood flow, but the brain is very efficient. It's very clever. You know, if you're running for your life, it gets very focused on survival. And so it will shut down parts of your body. And one of the things it shuts down is the digestive system, which explains why a lot of people in stress have stomach problems. Because digesting lunch is a luxury if you're running for your life, right? Now, the problem is that your digestive system shuts down, and then we get hungry and we eat something, and you put food into a system that's closed. That's why you're going to get IBS and bloating and pain and, you know, all kinds of stomach problems. It also shuts down fertility, because making babies is a luxury if you're running for your life, which is why a lot of ladies, you know, have difficulty conceiving, you know, if they're in a lot of stress. Other things, and by the way, these are all reversible. You know, please, I don't want anybody to get scared. You know, everybody I've spoken to, myself included, these things have all healed and, you know, reversed themselves. And other two things that I found fascinating about fight or flight is that it shuts down parts of the brain. Again, it's reversible. It's not permanent, but it shuts down things like creativity. Because if you are running for your life, you don't need to be thinking about, you know, I don't know, redecorating your living room, right? And so it's focused on, you know, calling the emergency number. It's focused on finding the fire exit. It's focused on getting away from that tiger. So creativity is not a priority, which makes sense, because when I was in like years of PTSD, I'm a very creative, artistic person. I could not do anything. I would get out a project and I'd be like, what's the point? You know, which is why if you like talk to somebody who's, you know, in a long depression, for example, and say, oh, let's go to a painting class. And they're like, really? Right? That it's not just like they're not being willing, but it's just not on their radar. And, and the other thing it shuts down is forward planning. Because again, if you're running for your life, then thinking about, you know, your holiday in the south of France next year is not important. You know, again, the brain is very efficient. It's based on surviving right here, right now. So that's why, like, I know for me, when my brother is a bank manager now, and he would say to me back when he was, you know, we were younger, he'd say, you should get a pension. You need to get a pension. You know, save money for when you retire. And I'm like, what? I'm not going to be dead by the time I'm 30. Why do I need a pension? Right? Like I couldn't think past next Thursday, let alone a pension. Like, thank God I eventually listened to him, and now I have one. But it was fascinating understanding, you know, all of this is wisdom of, you know, like divine mind has, you know, created this incredible system. But when we innocently don't understand, it can be really frightening. You know, creativity's gone. We can't think straight. You know, our bodies are hurting. And I know now that it was just trying to get my attention. So the slowing down now is more practical. Before it was just like, it was just a blessing that happened as part of this understanding. And now I just know better, rather than to get frightened if I, you know, my foot hurts or something, and I'm like, oh well, you know, and common sense will tell me if I need to go to the doctor. Like when I had pneumonia, I'd been coughing for like 2 weeks, and I thought, you know what, it's really bad. I thought bits of my lung were going to end up on the floor. So I thought, time to go to the doctor. And he sent me for X-ray and got antibiotics by the end of that day. You know, wisdom is right there when we need it. So if you need medical attention, wisdom and common sense will guide you to get that. Otherwise, you know, maybe I just need to, I don't always need to know what it is I'm stressed about, but all I need to know is that thinking whatever it is I'm, you know, up in my head about, is probably not a good idea. And just stop thinking it, let it go, watch it go by, you know, and come back to the moment where in this moment we're always okay. And I've actually worked with people who are experiencing physical pain, like say for cancer or heart failure or something, which is obviously not mind body, it's a structural thing. And state of mind is still important, because if you're dealing with something like that, then you're going to have a much better time if you're in a good state of mind dealing with physical pain than in a low state of mind. In fact, it can make a completely different experience. And in fact, I don't know if you guys know, but Sid Banks actually died of cancer, and it was actually brain cancer. And I remember talking to George Pransky about it, and he said that Sid's cancer was not the most important thing on his mind at the time. He said there were other things that were concerning him a lot more. His cancer was kind of like an inconvenience to him, which I can kind of imagine, you know, him being really gracious about it. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have a question or a theme?
Yeah, give me a theme.
Otherwise, I will continue, Chana,
Yeah,
when
go
I
for
have you here.
it.
As I said, I love the book, and I don't know what you want to reveal from the book because it was really interesting, but anything you want to tell us about hormones and what I was thinking a little bit about, I can tell you, and then you can see if that's what you want to talk about. That if people have been traumatized early, then they can feel their hormone stress, or they can be stressed by hormones. If you want to talk about that or anything about hormones.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really fascinating piece of research that I found. So I'm happy to describe it. So there's a diagnosis called PMDD, which stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And all you need to know is it's just like the worst, like if you know how women can be moody at certain times of the month. Well, these women are in such a bad way, they're almost suicidal. And when I started hearing about this, thank God I never had it that bad, but what I started thinking immediately was that imagine you had a really, really difficult time last month. Well, you know next month is coming, right? It's not like a fight with your boss or your sister where, you know, it might not happen again. But if you've just gone through this hellish experience and then you know next month is coming, the fear and the anticipation is already like moving and building. And then next month comes, and these women are in a terrible, terrible place. They only have like 1 or 2 days a month when they feel vaguely normal, which probably isn't even normal. Anyway, so I found some research about this, which was absolutely fascinating. There was a researcher in American University, and she wanted to know what the hormone levels were like in these women. Now, if you want to test someone's hormones, a blood test doesn't really work, because that just tells you what the hormones were like that minute, you know, you took the test. Things like what you eat for lunch, a good night's sleep can affect hormone levels. So the best way to test hormone levels is a urine test, and to do it over several days. So she got two groups of women together. One group had this diagnosis of PMDD, these suicidal women. And then the other group, she called them healthy, which I kind of objected to calling them healthy and them not, you know, not healthy. Anyway, so she tested their hormone levels. Now, before I tell you the result, going back a few years now, if you'd asked me in my 20s or my 30s what was happening each month when I was having a, you know, really miserable, moody time, I'd probably say something like, oh, you know, my body is, you know, broken, or my hormones are out of whack, or something was malfunctioning, something wasn't working properly. There was something broken about the system. That's what I thought. So when she tested these two groups, she discovered that their hormone levels were pretty much the same. The healthy women and the suicidal women. Now, to get the diagnosis of PMDD, you have to notice that it goes up and down with the monthly cycle. That's what makes it different to like general anxiety or depression. It's, you know, these women go up and down with the cycle. But their hormone level, every woman's hormones go up and down every month. That's why they call it a cycle. The healthy women are going up and down. These women are going down. These women are suicidal. These women aren't, right? So she got curious. Why is this group of women having such a hard time, and this women aren't, who have the same hormone levels? So she, being a good researcher, she got curious, and she went back and she asked all these women questions about their history and their background. And it wasn't 100%, but a large majority of these women had a history of trauma or abuse, or some kind of prolonged stressful thinking, some like an anxiety diagnosis of some kind. And I was listening to a lecture she gave to explaining this. And so she went into the history of like, if you've experienced child abuse or some trauma at an early age, you know, our brains are actually developing until we're into our 20s. So if you've experienced child abuse or trauma, and you're going through your teens when your body is developing, then that drop in hormones each month is kind of like another trauma to deal with. And then because these women had kind of grown up like that, they'd kind of trained their nervous systems to overreact every month. So like me with my pain, I wasn't making it up or exaggerating. It was really agonizing. These women are really, their moods are really going up and down. But it's all created through an innocent misunderstanding of thought. And so a lot of what she was saying in the lecture, the professor, was all about how she even said, she said the trauma isn't happening anymore, and yet they're feeling like it is. And I thought, ooh, that makes sense, right? We're feeling our thinking. Like me, the trauma happened, you know, the attacks I went through happened 30 years ago. If I think about it in a low mood, then I'm going to have a miserable experience now. So one of my favorite Sydney Banks quotes is, it comes from Second Chance. You know, Sydney Banks wrote 6 books, and his very first novel, Second Chance, there's a great quote at the beginning where he says, to go back into the past from a low state of mind is psychological suicide. So here's these women experiencing regular, normal ups and downs that all women experience. And then they're going back into their past, because a lot of the therapists encourage them to do that. They start thinking about what it was, how bad it was last time, how bad it's going to be next time, and getting themselves worked up into a horrible nightmare experience. and they know it's going to happen again and again and again. And they're traumatizing themselves with their own thinking. Because remember, their hormonal levels are the same as the women who aren't doing this. And so when I wrote the book and I explained all this, I had a lady read it who had a diagnosis of PMDD, and her symptoms started to go away. And I have a video interview with her, and she says how not only did her PMDD symptoms go away, but it, you know, improved obviously her relationship with her husband and her family. And she's an artist, she's a painter, and she couldn't even get out of bed for years because of this. And now she's painting and she's, you know, taking commissions, and she's almost too busy to talk to me anymore because she's like so busy doing her life now. It's an incredible example of how powerful this understanding is. Now, a lot of the ladies I try and give this over to, they do not want to listen. They don't want to know. They want to blame their body. They say their bodies are broken. They just want medication. They want surgeries. You know, it's hard to, because they hear it as blame, like it's their fault that they're doing it to themselves. And I stress all the time, it's an innocent misunderstanding. We all would do better if we knew better. And so some women have, you know, it's been very helpful to them because they've been open to a new idea. Not everybody. It's a challenge. So I'm keep hoping to get the book, you know, in front of more of these women so that they can experience the freedom, you know, that is available. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I mean, I called it a woman's book, but you know, I think it's good for men to know these things too.
Yes, I think so too. I'm going to give it to my husband.
Oh.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else have a question? Or did we have one in the chat, Ivan?
Yes, we have another question in the chat. It's from Susanne. Do you have any experience with chronic fatigue or low thyroid functions?
Chronic fatigue? Is that what you said?
Yes, chronic fatigue. Yes.
Yeah, chronic fatigue. I personally don't, but I've had clients who have had chronic fatigue syndrome. So, and also fibromyalgia. I think they're very similar. And what I've discovered, excuse me, I just did a talk before, so I've been talking for like hours now. What I discovered is people with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, and possibly thyroid as well, I don't know. For some reason, it seems to take longer to get well. I don't know why. I've asked doctors and they don't know why, but they can get better. That's the most important thing I want to say. They can get better, and I've seen it. And the first chronic fatigue person I worked with, it was a man who lived here locally, and he was quite fascinating. He couldn't even keep his eyes open. We were talking, he'd go like that. He was so tired, and it's not tired like he wants to go to sleep. It's like this fatigue where he couldn't even keep his eyes open. It was quite interesting. And he told me that what he saw was very connected to his perfectionist obsessive thinking. He was in school, he was learning, he was a student, and he'd gotten so obsessed with learning all the time, as much as he could. He would walk down the street with a book, right? He even resented taking care of his kids. He had 2 small children, and he was like, you know, he should be learning, should be studying. You know, and the kids were kind of, you know, getting in the way, and he felt so bad about that. So he was caught up in his thinking about he should be studying, he should be with his family, and he feels bad about this one, he feels bad about he's doing that one. Got himself into a real mess. And then I remember we did some work together, and he started to get a bit better. And then he sent me a message once. He said his wife and kids had gone away for the weekend, and all his symptoms went away. Right? Now, neither of us are suggesting that to get rid of his wife and kids, that wasn't the solution. What he saw was his thinking about his wife and kids and studying was what was causing the problem. Right? He was so up in his head all the time that he had no energy left for life. And he has gotten better. He lives in my neighborhood, so I see him, and he's doing so much better. It's slow, but he's getting better. And then I had a client with fibromyalgia, which is a very similar thing. And she, when I first met her, she couldn't even sit still in a session like this. It was too painful to sit for this long. She told me that she couldn't even go to a restaurant because sitting in a restaurant for a whole meal was too painful to sit on a chair that long. Her husband couldn't give her a hug even, it was that painful. And she'd had this for about 5 years, and she'd tried so many things. She'd even become a practitioner herself in some spiritual thing to try and fix it. And she and I, we had 10 hours of coaching sessions. I did a package of coaching with her, and she started getting better, but she was still in a lot of muscle pain. And then about 2 months after we'd kind of finished that initial coaching work, she caught the plane. She lived in Germany, and she caught an airplane to Jamaica, where she went to Miami and then Jamaica. It was her dream vacation was to go to Jamaica on holiday. Now, remember, at the beginning of this, she couldn't even sit through a Zoom session. How on earth did she sit on an airplane? I mean, flying from Cologne, Germany to Miami, that would be tough on anybody, right? It's a long flight, So, but she did it, and then she got another flight to Jamaica, and she was there for 3 weeks and had such a wonderful time. And then after she got back, she started doing exercise. She started running. She would run for a little bit and then, increase her running. She would have to rest after each, time she exercised, and then she didn't have to rest, and then she was able to run further. And it was like, say, it took her like a year or so. And what was amazing to me is she stopped talking about the pain. It wasn't the subject. We do coaching sessions every now and again. I do this mentoring thing on WhatsApp with people. So she was checking in with me all the time about, she fell in love with Sydney Banks. She fell in love with the principal. She's like translating stuff now. She's doing amazing stuff. And she doesn't talk about the pain anymore, partly because it's pretty much gone, but it wasn't the focus of her life anymore. I find that's what happens with a lot of people, is that they're spending a lot of time thinking about the pain, thinking about how to fix the pain. When is the pain going to go away? Why do I still have the pain? Oh my gosh, it came back, right? You can see this whole like pain life that we can live in when you have a chronic situation. And because of her insights into the principles and understanding, she lost interest in her pain, which went, I think, a long way to helping the nervous system calm down and her body healing. And even though she still had some residual muscle pain, it didn't bother her anymore. I'd ask her every now and again, how are you doing? She said, oh yeah, I still get some stiffness and some pain, but have you seen my garden? She's out gardening now and having a good time. She didn't interest her to even talk about it. I just would check in every now and again to see she was okay. So I find that people with these issues can get well. It just might take a little bit longer. The nervous system may have been, traumatized more. I don't know. I don't think there's anything useful in trying to work it out and assess it, because then that would be judgment, and that would be, a busy mind again. I heard a quote earlier. A lady said, I think it was Linda Pransky said, we can get through anything with a quiet mind. When we have a quiet mind, life stuff is still going to happen, but we can get through it. And it's not even getting through it. It's not even coping anymore. It's just, being okay with what is, which is what Sydney Banks was always pointing us to. When we can be okay with what is, whether it's something physical or emotional or, financial or I don't know, angry teenagers or, you know, weather, governments, you know, all kinds of things. When we can look at that, be with that from a quiet mind and rely on that divine mind that is full of loving kindness and always there to, you know, support us and give us wisdom, then we can get through anything. It's amazing. The resilience of human beings never ceases to amaze me. You know, it's a wonderful experience. So.
Thank you. Anyone have a last question or anything? We're summing this up.
Well, your baby looks so peaceful.
Yes, he's sleeping. I'm very grateful here. And that's why also hormones are really interesting, of course. I've been through them.
Yeah.
Both before and after now. So
Yeah.
we're getting a thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Mm.
So I'm going to be in Amsterdam in November doing a wellness retreat. My book is coming out in Danish in a couple of weeks. I just signed the contract today, and so I really want to come to Sweden and Denmark and, you know, those beautiful parts of the world. I've never been to Scandinavia, so if anybody wants to help put a wellness retreat together, I would love to come and visit you guys. So bear that in mind, because the Amsterdam one I'm really excited about that. It's going to be in a 4-star hotel just outside the city in the beautiful countryside there. So that's in the end of November. I'm going to be going there. So yeah.
Yeah, we hear you, Chana. So, and we are the 3PSC. So maybe we should put something.
Actually, I've just joined the 3PGC International Committee. So I'm going to be meeting with Shani and a couple of other people who are on the international committee. So I'm going to be doing that too.
Congrats to that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we hope that you're writing many more books. Yes, I'm actually writing 2 at the same time right now. I'm doing another novel. My next novel is going to be about a little bit about ADHD, overdiagnosis, and drug companies, because I'm a little cynical about drug companies. And then just to do a quick advertisement. I have this idea for a non-fiction book, because I'm known for writing stories, but I have a non-fiction book I'm working on. I'm collecting stories, and if anybody listening wants to give me their story, I'd be so happy. I'm collecting stories of hope, because in the 3 Principles community, there are so many people who have recovered from mental health diagnosis. You know, like when I had this idea, off the top of my head, I was thinking, you know, Michael Neal's suicidal ideation, Amy Johnson with bulimia, you know, my friend Yael Abramson with psychosis. You know, there's incredible stories, and I wanted to collect them. So I'm writing a book there where the first half of the book will be a kind of a history of psychiatry and how they've got it wrong. And then an introduction to Sydney Banks and how Sid basically said there is only one generic mental illness. That's a misunderstanding of thought. And then the second half of the book is going to be stories. So, because I want the book to be for social workers and therapists, doctors. So I'm talking in the language of diagnosis and labels, and I'm pointing to the fact that it's all made up. And look at all these people who were told that they would have to take medication for the rest of their lives. They're going to be in hospitals for the rest of their lives. And they are well, and they have recovered, and they don't need to be going back to treatments and medications anymore. They're off living beautiful, wonderful lives, all through understanding and insights. So I've
already collected 15 stories. I have about another 20 or 30 people have promised me their stories. I have a deadline coming up. So Michael Neal said yes. Amy Johnson said yes. Linda Kearing, I don't know if you guys know that name. She was Sid Banks's first ever client. She wrote some books with Sid. She's already given me her story. I've got, you know, like OCD, PTSD. Rob Cook is writing his story for me. Win Morgan. So like all these. Joe Bailey's going to give me his Lyme story. You know, and then I'm going to have people like Bill Pettit and Joe and Dickon, and people are going to interview them about, you know, about treatment for, you know, and how psychology's got it wrong, and how this is, you know, so much, such a beautiful thing to offer for people. So it's an interesting project. I think it's going to be a great resource for everybody. And I'm thinking after the book, there'll be maybe a website so we can keep adding stories. You know, it can be like a resource where we can keep adding stories and send people to look, you know, people get well, you know, just because you've got a diagnosis it's not who you are. It's not a life sentence. It's, you know, there's hope. So I'm writing that book as well. So if anybody here has a story they'd like to, you know, offer me, I'd be so excited. Or if you know anybody, you know, who has a story like that of recovery from any kind of mental health diagnosis, then I'd love to hear about it. You can get my email, I'm sure, from Hannah or from Ilva.
Yes. Is it okay if we put it out? Your email address?
Please.
Yeah.
Please, yeah.
That sounds amazing, that project. Wow.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for your time, your knowledge, and your wisdom, Chana.
Yeah, my
I hope
pleasure.
to see you again soon.
Yeah.
And read her books.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.